You remember silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy, aching kind. The kind that fills the house after a fight, when everyone has said to Muchan nothing at all. That was your world before the internet. A quiet room, a ticking clock, and thoughts that never left your head. Back then, nobody really talked about feelings. You just existed. You ate what was given, you went where you were told, and you accepted that loneliness was part of growing up. There was no screen to escape into, no digital world to hide behind. Just you and your thoughts. And sometimes, that was the worst company to keep. You were a child of the analog world, a world made of paper, not pixels. You woke up to the sound of a rooster, not a notification. You learned patience from waiting for letters, for buses, for someone to come back. Your mother told you stories around candlelight. Your father worked long hours you never understood. You'd sit on the veranda, watching people walk by, wondering what it was like to live somewhere else. There were no maps you could zoom into, no YouTube channels showing the beauty of Paris or the chaos of New York. The world felt infinite, and your small town, your small life, felt like the edge of the universe. When it rained, you played outside barefoot. Mud between your toes, laughter echoing through the empty street. It was freedom, or what you thought freedom meant. But inside, there was something missing. A hunger you couldn't name. A loneliness you didn't have words for. You'd stare at the stars, believing that someone out there must feel the same way. But you'd never meet them. Not in that lifetime. Everything was slow, painfully slow. You wrote letters that took weeks to arrive, if they arrived at all. You'd pour your soul into a page, seal it, and wait days, sometimes months for a reply that might never come. Sometimes, by the time it arrived, your feelings had already changed. But that didn't matter, because the world before the internet was a world built on waiting. Waiting for news. Waiting for love. Waiting for the next episode on TV that might never air again if you missed it. You couldn't replay life. You couldn't rewind moments. Everything was one take, one shot, and if you messed it up, it was gone. Your childhood was defined by absence. If someone moved away, that was it. They were gone. Forever. No messages. No status updates. Just silence. And maybe that's why people back then held on so tightly. Because letting go meant never seeing them again. You met her at a library. Because that was where love used to happen, between books, not screens. She had eyes like burnt honey, and the way she turned pages felt like art. You fell for her slowly, quietly, in the smell of old paper and ink. There were no DMs, no late-night texts, just stolen glances, shared smiles, and long walks after class. When she left for another city, you promised to write. And you did, every week, every month, every season. But the letters came slower, and her replies came shorter. Until one day, they stopped. You went to the post office every morning, just in case. But deep down, you already knew. She had moved on. And you? You were still waiting for the postman. You told yourself it was fate, that maybe love wasn't meant to last. But truthfully, it just hurt that you'd never get closure. No explanation. No goodbye. Just the echo of her name in your mind and the smell of rain on empty paper. That was heartbreak before the internet. Silent. Endless. There were nights when the house was so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. You'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake you ever made. There was no one to distract you. No playlist to drown it out. No strangers online to say, "I feel that too." If you were depressed, people said you were lazy. If you were anxious, they said you worried too much. If you cried, they told you to toughen up. You learned early that emotions had to stay hidden. That silence was safer than honesty. So you smiled. You laughed when people did. You went to church, to school, to work. And inside, you carried a storm that nobody ever saw. Then one day, everything started to change. You remember the first time you heard the sound of a dial-up connection. That high-pitched screech, annoying, strange, but somehow magical. For the first time, you could talk to someone miles away instantly. You could send words that didn't take weeks to arrive. You could find people who liked the same songs, the same books, the same dreams. The internet didn't just connect machines that connected hearts. You met friends you never would have known existed. You saw faces from countries you couldn't even spell before. And suddenly, the world didn't feel so small anymore. You felt alive, seen, heard, but it came too late. Because by then, life had already hardened you. You didn't know how to open up anymore. You had grown used to loneliness, so when connection arrived, you didn't know how to handle it. You didn't trust it. You didn't trust anyone. You were born just a little too soon. Early enough to live without the internet, but late enough to watch others grow up with it. You watched younger generations live the life you dreamed of, connected, expressive, free. They could share emotions, speak truth, find communities that healed them. You envied them, because when you were their age, you didn't have that luxury. You had to be strong. You had to pretend. They posted feelings online, you buried yours under duty and survival. They had therapy, you had silence. They had hope, you had memories. You realized something cruel. You were the bridge generation, the ones who saw both worlds. The ones who grew up analog but died digital. The ones who learned too late what connection truly meant. Sometimes you look at your old photos. They're not out of cloud or a drive. They're faded prints, edges curled, colors bleeding with time. You hold them carefully, afraid they'll crumble. In each picture, there's a younger you smiling, unaware of how fast life would change. Back then, photos were rare. Every shot mattered. Every pose meant something. Now people take hundreds a day, and none of them mean anything. You miss the weight of moments, the meaning behind small gestures. The way time felt slower, heavier, more sacred. You think about how everything you loved once lived only in memory. Now, memories live online, replayed endlessly, never dying. And somehow, that feels less human. Nobody talks about the trauma of growing up unseen. How silence became a wound that never healed. How many people you lost because there was no way to find them again. If someone disappeared back then, they were gone. If someone died, their voice vanished forever. No videos, no messages, just absence. You learned grief the hard way by forgetting the sound of someone's laughter, by trying to remember the color of their eyes years later and failing. You envy the ones now who can replay a moment, hear a voice again, see a smile one more time. You couldn't. You just had to let go. And that letting go, that was the cruelest part of being born before the internet. Years later, someone tagged you in an old photograph. It was blurry, but it was you young, alive, real. And for a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself. Like the past and the present were shaking hands. You scrolled through comments people you hadn't spoken to in decades, laughing about memories you'd forgotten. And you realized something. The internet didn't kill nostalgia. It resurrected it. It gave ghosts a voice. It made memories breathe again. But at the same time, it reminded you of everything you lost. Everything you lived through without it. Everything you never got to say when it mattered. You couldn't help but wonder how many friendships could have survived. How many loves could have lasted. How many hearts wouldn't have broken if you were just born a little later. Now, you scroll through timelines filled with people sharing, connecting, living in real time. You're proud of them. You're happy for them. But sometimes it hurts to realize they'll never know what silence feels like. They'll never know the pain of waiting by a phone that never rings, the ache of writing letters that never return, the emptiness of walking through life without a place to belong. They don't understand what it means to crave connection so deeply it becomes part of your DNA. They don't know how heavy solitude can be when it's all you've ever known. You do. Because you were born in that space between IRAs. Too late for innocence, too early for connection. A relic of a lonely time. And no matter how far the internet has come, part of you is still stuck there in that quiet room, listening to the sound of your own thoughts, wishing someone, somewhere, could hear them too. It sucked to be born before the internet, not because life was simpler, but because you felt everything and couldn't share it, because you had stories no one ever heard, because you loved people you could never find again, because your emotions were too big for the world that existed then. You were born in a time that didn't know how to listen. And by the time it learned, you had already gone quiet. Maybe that's why you write now. Why you scroll through endless feeds looking for something that feels like you. Why you linger on old songs, old names, old memories. You're not searching for attention. You're searching for proof. Proof that you existed before all this began. That you mattered in a world that didn't have a place to store your soul. Because that's the cruel irony of it all. You spent your youth unseen. And now, in a world where everyone can be seen, you're invisible and buried under millions of voices that came too late to hear yours. You close your laptop and stare at the glow fading on the screen. The hum of the fan sounds like the static of your old radio. You think of the quiet streets, the handwritten letters, the waiting. You think of who you were before the world got loud. And in that silence, you realize something tragic and beautiful. The internet gave humanity a voice. But for you, it came just a little too late. That's why it sucked to be born before the internet. Because you lived in a world that never knew how to hear you until after you stopped speaking. But tell me something if you had the chance to go back to live one more day in that quiet. Before the noise, before the screens, would you take it? Or have we already forgotten what silence feels like? Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that make you feel something real.